We are not bodies that possess a soul. We are souls momentarily wearing a body. But what happens to the soul when the body is turned to ash? Does God recoil? Or does he reveal? Pause for a moment. This question, what becomes of us after death, has haunted humanity since the dawn of thought. And in that haunting, in our desperate attempt to make peace with mortality, we've created rituals, rites, and rules. One such rule, ingrained in some traditions, is that cremation is a sin. But today, let us wander away from the echo chambers of tradition and listen instead to God not as thunder from above, but as the stillness within. This is not a sermon. This is not rebellion. This is clarification. Because you see, when people speak of sin, they often speak with trembling, but God does not tremble. God understands. And if we truly wish to know whether cremation offends the divine, we must first understand who, or what, we think God really is. Is he a cosmic judge, taking inventory of burial rites? Or is he the very breath behind every ritual, every fire, every tear? I ask you to stay with me, because the truth, as revealed in nature, in spirit, and yes, even in Scripture, is far more liberating than fear allows. By the end of this talk, you won't just have an answer to the question, is cremation a sin? You will begin to see the whole question dissolve, and in its place something truer will emerge, because when God clarifies, confusion ceases, not with punishment, but with peace. The illusion of death is perhaps the greatest misunderstanding humanity has ever embraced. We treat death as a line, a final punctuation mark on the story of the self. But to perceive death this way is to forget that life was never about the body in the first place. The body is the vessel, the costume, the instrument. It comes and it goes, and yet something else. The awareness behind the eyes, the presence that watches thoughts arise and fall. That is what we truly are. And yet, in our fear of losing the physical form, we begin to worship it long after it has served its purpose. We grow attached to its preservation, or we fear its destruction. And this fear births dogma, rules about what must or must not happen to a body once the soul has moved on. Cremation, in some eyes, becomes a violation of something sacred. But what is being violated? If the soul has already transcended, then what remains is no longer the being. It is the echo. To hold that burning the body is sinful is to assume the body retains its divine significance after the divine has departed. This is the illusion, believing that the body is the person, the identity, the soul itself. When in truth the body is a temporal experience, like a wave arising briefly from the ocean, then falling back into it. It is part of nature's cycle, dust to dust, ashes to ashes, not as a punishment but as a return. The notion that cremation offends God is rooted not in divine revelation, but in human fear, fear of what we do not understand, fear that unless we perform death correctly, we might anger the very source of life itself. But death, real death, is not the opposite of life. It is the continuation of it, a doorway into a subtler form. If we could see the soul's journey clearly, without cultural blinders or religious guilt, we might recognize that fire is not just destruction. It is transformation. It is the energy of release. The body, whether buried or burned, becomes part of the earth again. It does not carry sin with it. It carries only change. Religious dogma and human understanding often clash when it comes to how we interpret the divine will. We tend to look at ancient texts, sacred teachings, and age-old traditions as if they were the sole truth, as if they were definitive instructions on how to navigate the mysteries of life and death. But in doing so, we forget one essential thing. The divine speaks not only through sacred scripture, but through the world itself, in every breath, every whisper of the wind, every leaf that falls. The teachings of God cannot be confined to ink on paper or the rituals of the past. They are ever present, unfolding in real time within us and around us. When it comes to death, specifically, we need to recognize that the human understanding of the afterlife and the proper treatment of the body is often limited and narrow. Too often we interpret these practices through the lens of fear and separation, thinking that if we do not follow the prescribed steps, if we do not bury, cremate, or mourn in the right way, we risk offending God or inviting spiritual ruin. But God's will is not a checklist. It is the harmonious rhythm of existence, a force that transcends ritualistic rules and embraces the inherent flow of life and death. In many traditions, cremation is seen as sinful. Yet, this view often arises not from divine revelation, but from human interpretation. It stems from an attachment to the physical body, an unwillingness to let go of what we have known as ours. But God's clarity comes when we step beyond our fear and allow ourselves to see the truth. The body, no matter what happens to it, does not define the soul. It is but a temporary vessel, a vehicle for the expression of spirit. If the body is burned, buried, or allowed to return to the earth in another way, it is not a punishment. It is part of the natural order. The essence of who we are, our consciousness, transcends the form. When we let go of the fear of offending God with our physical rituals, we make room for the deeper understanding of divine presence. In truth, God's will is not about how the body is treated after death. It is about how we live in the moment, how we honor the divine in every action, and how we embrace the mystery of life and death with open hands and hearts. The divine speaks in all things, and to restrict that understanding to ritualistic rules alone is to limit God's infinite expression. Fire, as an element, has always held a profound significance in spiritual traditions, yet its true meaning is often misunderstood. To many, fire represents destruction, the end of things, scorched earth, reduced to ashes. But what if this view is too simplistic? What if fire, in its most sacred form, is not a force of annihilation, but of transformation? When we turn to fire in the context of death, whether through cremation or the cleansing of a space, we are participating in something much grander than simply burning away the physical. Fire, in its cosmic role, is the agent of purification, renewal, and change. In the process of cremation, we are not simply reducing the body to its elemental components. We are engaging with fire's transformative nature, recognizing that even in its destruction there is a deeper meaning. Just as fire refines gold by melting it down, it is not eradicating the essence, but rather liberating it. The same applies to our understanding of the soul's journey. Death does not mark the end of the soul. It marks the beginning of its transition into another state. And in this transition, fire plays a crucial role, not as an enemy, but as a liberator. It burns away the material shell so that the true essence of who we are, our soul, can rise and continue its journey. This symbolic language of fire reaches far beyond the physical world. In many ancient spiritual traditions, fire is seen as a bridge between the material and the immaterial, a link to the divine. The fire that consumes the body after death is not a punishment. It is a celebration of transformation. It is a reminder that all things are impermanent, that everything must eventually return to the whole, to the infinite source. Just as the fire of creation formed the universe, so too does the fire of death complete the cycle of life. Yet, when we see fire solely as a destructive force, we miss its deeper spiritual significance. Fire is not merely the end of something, it is the beginning of something new. It is the constant reminder that life, death, and rebirth are inextricably linked, that nothing is truly lost, only transformed. In this way, cremation is not a sin against God, but a recognition of the eternal nature of the soul. It honors the sacred cycle of life and death, and the transformative power of fire that allows us to step into the next phase of our God's voice is not only found in sacred texts or religious doctrines. It is encoded in the natural order itself. The patterns of life, the rhythms of the universe, the cycles of the seasons, all speak to us of a divine intelligence that transcends human understanding. But we often make the mistake of thinking that the voice of God is something separate from nature, something that can be heard only through words, prayers, or rituals. In truth, God's will is not something confined to religious prescriptions. It is woven into the very fabric of existence. To understand God's will, we must look at the world with a fresh perspective, seeing beyond the physical and recognizing the divine hand in all things. This understanding becomes especially important when we consider the question of what happens to the body after death. Religious dogma often frames the physical body as sacred and untouchable, as if the act of cremation, for example, is a violation of divine order. But when we turn our attention to the natural world, we see something entirely different. Nature does not hold onto things forever. The body, like everything else in the universe, is subject to the laws of impermanence. It decays, returns to the earth, and eventually transforms into something else. The natural cycle is not a process of sin. It is a process of life itself. It is God's will made manifest. In this way, to view the act of cremation as sinful is to misunderstand the divine wisdom that governs nature. God's voice is not shouting through rigid rules about burial practices. It is whispering to us through the way the body naturally returns to the earth. It is found in the fire that transforms the material into energy, the cycle of decay that nourishes the soil, and the plants that rise from the earth, fed by the very elements that once comprised our physical form. God's will is not an arbitrary set of rules. It is the expression of the divine order in the natural world. When we recognize this, we see that cremation, far from being a sin, is simply part of the natural cycle. It is not a violation of divine order. It is an affirmation of it. By releasing the body to the transformative power of fire, we are participating in the same processes that sustain life, that maintain balance in the world. We are acknowledging that the body, like everything else, is not permanent, but that which is eternal. The soul, the essence of who we are, remains unchanged. The divine does not demand that we hold onto the body forever. It calls us to recognize the eternal nature of the soul and to trust that in every stage of life and death, we are moving toward unity with the divine. When we speak of the soul, we often do so in terms that separate it from the body, imagining that it is something ethereal, intangible, and distinct. But this separation is an illusion, an artificial construct created by the mind. The soul, in truth, is not a discrete entity that inhabits the body. It is the very energy that animates the body. It is the consciousness that makes us aware of our thoughts, our emotions, our actions, and our existence. When the body dies, it is not the soul that vanishes. Rather, it is the physical vessel that is no longer able to carry the essence of who we are. The soul does not need a body to continue its existence. It is beyond the limits of form. In many cultures, the treatment of the body after death is of paramount importance because it is believed that the soul's journey depends on the proper rites and rituals. But in this, we often misunderstand the true nature of the soul. The soul is not bound by ritual. It is not bound by the manner in which the body is disposed of. Whether the body is buried, cremated, or left to return to the earth in some other way, the soul continues on its path unaffected by the physical process. What the soul requires is not adherence to a set of rules, but rather the recognition that it is free, eternal, and untouched by the physical realm. Cremation as a practice may be seen as a way to release the body back into the natural cycle, but it is not something that has the power to harm or damage the soul. There is no need for fear, no need for guilt, because the soul is not dependent on the physical form to reach its next stage of evolution. Whether through cremation or burial, the soul's journey continues, unhindered and unchanged. In fact, many traditions speak of the soul as being liberated when the body is released to the earth or to fire. Cremation, in this light, is not an act of destruction, but one of release, a letting go of the physical in order to allow the soul to move forward. Just as a bird spreads its wings to fly, so too does the soul transcend its temporary physical form, moving toward its next experience, its next level of awareness. The soul is not tied to the body, nor is it trapped by the rituals that surround death. It is, in its essence, already free. Therefore, whether one chooses cremation, burial, or any other form of post-death ritual, the soul's journey remains uninterrupted. It is not the form that matters. It is the awareness that the soul is eternal, that it is connected to the divine, and that it is constantly evolving. The question is not what happens to the body, but what we believe about the soul. When we understand that the soul is not dependent on the body or the rituals we perform, we can release the fear and embrace the truth that the soul's journey is guided by something far greater than any earthly concern. The fear-based practices surrounding death and the treatment of the body often stem from a deep, ingrained belief that we must appease a wrathful or judgmental God. This belief creates a sense of urgency and anxiety about doing things right, in order to avoid punishment or spiritual ruin. But what if this fear is not reflective of the divine will, but a misunderstanding of the true nature of God? God, in his infinite wisdom, is not concerned with our fear-driven adherence to rituals and dogma. His will is not bound by human-made rules or judgments. It is about the relationship we cultivate with the divine presence in every moment of our lives. In many spiritual traditions, the fear of sin is often linked to the idea of death. There is a prevailing belief that certain acts, like cremation, may violate divine laws or disrupt the soul's journey. But when we step back and consider the divine intelligence behind the natural world, we realize that these fear-driven practices often stem from a misunderstanding of the soul's nature. The soul is not fragile, nor is it easily harmed by the way the body is treated after death. It is part of a larger, more expansive system of existence, a system in which life, death, and rebirth are fluid, interconnected processes, not rigid and fearful endpoints. Liberation from fear-based practices means embracing the understanding that death is not something to be feared, nor is it something that separates us from God. Instead, it is a natural transition, part of the ongoing flow of the universe. By recognizing that God is present in every moment, alive in every breath, in every tree, in every fire, we can begin to see that his presence does not disappear with death. The body may return to the earth or to fire, but the soul remains ever connected to the divine. And it is this connection that truly matters. Rather than clinging to fear or performing rituals out of a sense of obligation or guilt, we can find peace in knowing that the divine presence is not bound by physicality. It is everywhere in everything, and we are always connected to it. When we free ourselves from the fear of doing things incorrectly or violating some imagined law, we are liberated to experience life and death in its fullest, most sacred form. The divine does not ask for rituals out of fear. It asks for a heart that is open to love, to life, to the eternal cycle of existence. By letting go of fear and embracing this deeper understanding, we can see death not as an end, but as part of the ongoing flow of divine energy, ever changing, ever present, and ever moving toward unity. In the end, the question of cremation being a sin or not dissolves when we step back and recognize the deeper truth, that the body is not the soul, and the soul is not bound by the rituals we impose upon it. We are not defined by the physical form, but by the eternal consciousness that flows through us. God's will is not confined to rules and rituals. It is the divine order that underlies all existence, speaking to us through the natural world and the cycles of life, death, and rebirth. Whether the body is cremated, buried, or returned to the earth in another way, it does not alter the essence of who we are or the journey of the soul. When we let go of fear-driven beliefs and embrace the deeper understanding that the soul transcends the physical, we are liberated from the weight of judgment and guilt. God's presence is not a distant force, but the very energy that flows through all things, life, death, fire, and transformation alike. In recognizing this, we realize that there is no need for fear or confusion about the afterlife or the treatment of the body. The soul's journey continues beyond the physical, guided by the eternal light of the divine. So, let us release the fear of sin, the fear of judgment, and instead open ourselves to the divine clarity that life and death are not separate but part of the same sacred flow. Cremation, or any other post-death ritual, is not a sin. It is a part of the natural process, a return to the whole. In embracing this truth, we honor the divine in all things, and in doing so, we can experience peace in the face of the mysteries of life and death,